Okay, I think we're good now.
All right. You want to do the sound check now?
Somebody already replied and said that the sound was high.
Okay.
See someone responding in terms of.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I'm able to see the speaker well because he hasn't stepped in the phone.
An interview almost.
Oh, yes, Cynthia. Okay, so that's good.
Oh, okay, I see this.
Yes, okay.
So would they be able to hear me as well?
Did Tony put the microphone in there?
I think the wires and everything.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, so maybe, if you could sit a little closer to her so the wireless.
You can pick up the, all right, the sound. Okay.
Okay. Oh, I think the microphone is still set on the camera, so you should be good. And then I'll switch it over when you start talking.
So will the microphone pick her up? Do you want to do a sound check?
No, we're good. So you can go ahead. It's the microphone in the little Logitech camera.
Right, I understand that.
That's picking up right now. So that picks up everything in the room.
Okay.
All right. Well, good afternoon. I'm Cynthia Lester, and I'm the Executive Director for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math here at Georgia Florida College, and we're absolutely delighted to present our first STEAM talk, which includes the arts, for this spring 2014 semester. And for our first presenter of our STEAM talk, we have Professor Leon Dash, who is a former professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, joining us. She's going to present a very interesting topic this afternoon, which I'm very delighted to hear. So with no further ado, I bring you Professor Dash. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. We discussed this topic the other day. I'm going to talk today about adolescent childbearing, a study that I did on adolescent childbearing in the Black community in Washington, D.C. First of all, when I've been overseas for some years as an acting correspondent, and when I returned in early 1984, a friend of mine told me in casual conversation that 63% of all Black children born in America in 1983 were the children of single mothers. And a third of those single mothers were adolescent girls growing up in urban poverty. When I told her figures were wrong, that indeed, when I left the country, I hadn't heard figures like that. And I didn't think that there had been such a pronounced increase in the time that I was out of the country, which was about 7 years. She bet me that her figures were right, so we had a dinner at the Reed Gauche restaurant in Washington. The restaurant is so expensive it no longer exists. I'm still paying for that meal. Her figures were right, I was wrong. Of course, she had to order a bottle of wine, 1935, some French wine, just do it up. But anyway, I went out to the National Institute of Health and I approached the marketer named Wendy Baldwin to ask her about these figures, to get an understanding what's going on. And she said at the time, she confirmed that my friend had the figures right, and at the time, the number of adolescent childbirths in the Black community was really skyrocketing, and they were concentrated in urban poverty. There was an increase also in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan among white youths, and again, in areas dominated, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, areas of Appalachia, among white youths living in poverty. So I decided I wanted to do a project on adolescent childbirth. And what I started doing is I collected every census tract in Washington, D.C. to see what the highest numbers of adolescent childbearing were. And I found one census tract, a mile-square community on the city's border with the state of Maryland, in southeast Washington, called Washington Island. And that's the area that I decided to move into and live, and I actually lived there for a year. The census tract information was that Washington Highlands had the highest population of people living in poverty, 26% of its 19,000 residents, and the highest level at that time in Washington, D.C., of adolescent childbirth, 53 children born to every 1,000 adolescent girls. I moved in July of 1984. The building was 2 doors away from Paramount Baptist Church. I went to see the Reverend Irvin Shore at Paramount Baptist Church, and he introduced me to the head of the youth committee of the church. The youth committee introduced me to Tasha Vaughn, an adolescent who lived in Washington Highlands, and I just went from there to there. She gave me a number of names and introductions. She knew this is a relatively small community, 19,000 residents, 1 square mile. So the adolescents had all gone to school with one another beginning in kindergarten at the Washington Highlands Community Elementary School. There were 3 schools in this community: Washington Highlands Elementary School, Hart Junior High School, Below High School. So they had known the adolescents had known each other in this community for about, on an average, 10 to 12 years. I approached 22 families. I told them what I was doing. I was a Washington Post reporter, looking at the incidents of adolescent childbirth in the Black community. And of the 22 families, 13 families came into the study. After a couple of months, I dropped 7 families and kept 6, because in the 11 families, there were 2 families with 11 children each. And I decided to keep 1 family of 11 children and drop 1 family of 11 children. The 6 families, 3 of the 6 families were headed by married couples. 3 of the 6 families were headed by single mothers. And my intention was to interview repeatedly everyone in the families over a period of time. I had already had experience in terms of interviewing a father and son who were locked up in the same prison, and I did a project on prison reform. And I had noticed that after I interviewed them for a couple of months, they really began to open up to me. So I understood going into this project that my objective was to get people to voluntarily remove their public mask. And that means you have to establish a relationship with each individual you're interviewing. And that was my intention, and I succeeded over a period of 17 months with all the individuals in these families. The important thing to note is that at the beginning of the project, in the initial interviews with all the adolescents, every adolescent lied to me across the board, without exception. And that was something that I expected. Number one, I was going into a very sensitive area, human sexuality, and which is a very sensitive topic in private, among any ethnic group at any class level. And I made an error at the beginning by starting out discussing with the adolescents, both the girls and the boys, the beginning of their sexualities. And I decided that I needed to establish a relationship with them first. And the best way to do that was to begin the interviews in a relatively neutral area. So I backed up. Well, after my second interview with an adolescent, I interviewed Lottie Marie Williams, who was 16 years old and had a 2-year-old daughter. And the interview went for about a half hour. She was very nervous, and I could see that she was making up answers as we went along. So I turned off, I used a tape recorder in those days, and I turned off the tape recorder and I said to her that she had been exactly candid with me in the discussion of how she had become a mother at 14. And she said, no, that she had given me the answers that she thought would satisfy a high school counselor. And I said, oh boy, you're in trouble. But that's not the story that I want to write, a story that you give to the high school counselor. And I also picked up that most of the adolescents I was interacting with in these 6 families had all created stories that satisfied what they thought would be draw empathy from adults, right, rather than the truth. But I also was relying on something that all journalists rely on. And I knew that this was going to evolve over time in my interactions with the families. I didn't know how it was going to play out, but I was certain it would play out. And it's a universal human weakness that all journalists rely on. And I won't, with most students, I go around and ask them what they think that is. But here, I'll tell you what I think it is. It's the human inability to keep a secret. So if they have confided in someone in the family, during my interaction with that individual, that person will break the confidence and tell me. But of course, swear me to an open secret. Or that I at least not revealed from where I got the information. Never revealed any of that information. Because I figured that the adolescent that I was interviewing about when he or she became a parent would figure out where I got the information. So to this day, they don't know that before they were willing to tell me the truth, I already knew what the truth was from their confidants. And then in another instance, I interviewed Sheila Matthews in front of her parents, her mother and father. And after about 45 minutes into the interview, this is in the family living room. Father sitting over here, mother sitting to my left, Sheila sitting right in front of me. She was 15 years old, 6 months pregnant, and a high school student at Blue High School. And she said to me, well, my pregnancy is a sign from God that He loves me. And I said, ooh. Wow. And I knew the Baptist church she went to, and I said, I don't know exactly that gets into this. But, you know, I wasn't, the process that I'm using is emergent journalism, and you don't confront the person you're interviewing. You have to wait until the person is willing to tell you the truth. And you don't say, oh, that doesn't sound, you don't make fun of that and you're not judgmental. But her mother erupted in fury. Yeah, she was sitting on my left, and she jumped up out of the chair and said, don't you tell that man that goddamn lie. Wow. And then Sheila jumped up, and I forget if Sheila said that, but the tape recorder was going. And they started walking toward each other. And the heat between them began to go up and up. And I looked at the father to come and intercede. He just looked at me and he started this. So luckily, they both were relatively short, and I jumped up and continued because I was afraid they were going to really get into physical altercation. And I ended the interview there. And I determined after that never to interview one of these adolescent parents in front of their parents. Because one of the things that I learned, remember, I'm interviewing the parents in the family and all the children in each family. All of the mothers, without exception, knew their daughter's motivations for becoming a parent. And all of the mothers told me what their daughter's motivations were. And all of the adolescents eventually, after 4 to 6 months of interviewing, told me the same story. It was all consistent. All right? Mothers knew their daughters very, very well. Most of the mothers, 5 of the 6 families, 5 of the mothers had been adolescent mothers themselves and had tried to keep their daughters from following the same road. And were very angry with their daughters for the most part because they had, right? But after these experiences at the beginning of the project, I decided that I would never again stop any interview where where the child was conceived or where the person's sexuality had begun. I'd start each interview with the person's school history. So the first interview was, this is for the adults and the adolescents, was the person's school history. This would be interview number 1, generally about 2 hours. And we would start at the person's earliest childhood memory in school, whether it was preschool, kindergarten, Washington Highlands Elementary School didn't have a kindergarten, so most of the kids started there in the first grade. Some kids that started school in the South moved into this community at an early age, still in elementary school, and went to Washington Highlands Elementary School in the 3rd or 4th grade. After we completed this, the next week, I'd come back and do another 2-hour interview growing up in the family. Again, starting with the person's earliest childhood memory in this area. That often was Christmas. First Christmas that they can remember. The tree, the lights, the gifts. Some kids remember Easter as their earliest childhood memory. Can anyone guess why? Why do you folks sit here? Can anyone guess why they remembered Easter as their earliest childhood memory? No? No. Chocolate bunny. And most of them started biting off the ears. Right? Chocolate bunny, that's what they remember, right? So in that case, that's where we began the interview, wherever they remember. Most memory begins to form around between the ages of 3 and 4. Maurice is an exception. His memory goes back to 2. But most memory begins at 3 or 4. It's spotty, if you can remember dramatic events. After we did family, 3rd interview, again 2 hours. I'm limiting it to 2 hours. I'm stopping it after 2 hours. Because I don't want to wear anyone out, and I want them to stay with me. The 3rd interview would be faith. Whatever religion you grew up in, how you were introduced to religion, Sunday school, going to school, going to church with your parents, whatever the circumstances are. I teach this methodology now at the University of Illinois, and occasionally, and each student has to find someone that they can interview at least 7 times during the semester. And some students come back to the class and say, well, my person is an atheist or agnostic. And I said, well, you still do the interview because they weren't born that way. So you have to take them through their early exposure to religion and whether the rejection of God and religion is an emotional decision or an intellectual decision. But you still do the interview, so I expect a transcript that I will grade so they go and do the interview. Right? And then finally, growing up outside the family. Fourth issue, and this involves your independence away from home. The first time, if you can remember, your parent sent you, or your mother sent you, or your father sent you on a neighborhood errand, local store to buy bread, that evening's dinner, or whatever the reason was, and they could trust that you could get to the store and get back home without being hit by a car. That's the beginning of your independence outside the home, right? Now, classically, and this holds true to today with the students, classically, somewhere between the 3rd and 4th interview, the person you interviewed begins to contradict what they told you in the first 2 interviews. Right? And I have to warn my students, you are not to say, that's not what you told me in the first interview. Well, that's not what you told me in the second interview. That's not what you told me 2 weeks ago. You would note the contradiction and say nothing. Don't react to it. Very important that you not put the person on the defense. I had to stop doing that because one student, after she had done the fourth interview, told the person, "Well, you lied to me 2 weeks ago." The person stayed with the project anyway, but I thought she had driven the person away because this is all voluntary. And people are not going to sit there and have you tell them, you know, you're a liar, and then continue to be interviewed. The interviewer is in a very powerful position. So the interviewer has to be sensitive to this, right? Hopefully, everyone who does this methodology will find contradictions between the third and fourth interview. Because what does that mean when the contradictions begin to appear? Sometimes they are dramatic, and sometimes they're very subtle. But they always contradict what your understanding is from the first two interviews. In fact, first two interviews, you may get a picture of a perfect family life. You know, nothing but harmony. But that may not be the case. Here, things begin to open up for you. What has happened is the person has begun to open up to you because the person has begun to trust you and understand how you may handle the information that he or she is giving to you, right? Importantly, in the school history and in the family history, often the person you're interviewing will ask you to repeat the question, right? And, you know, my voice is very heavy, and, you know, it's very easy to pick up what I'm saying. But I understand what's going on. But they entirely missed the content of your question. Anyone tell me why? No? No?
Were they already thinking about an answer that you wanted to hear?
No. If you're looking at them, they're intensely focused on the interviewer.
They seem to be more trying to get something out.
Well, I am trying to get something out of them. I told them that when I approached it. Yeah.
That's part of the story.
Well, my questions are based only on what they tell me. I don't have a list of questions. And I don't look away from them. I don't take any notes. I engage them because I want to eventually have this turn into a conversation. Right? I am, but only based on what they tell me. But I'm assuming that in the first two interviews they were omitting a lot, particularly in the second interview on family. I'm assuming that they were omitting quite a bit. But I only ask the question based on what they tell me to move the interview forward. No?
It's a lack of trust.
Yeah, that's right.
It's an issue of trust, but what are they doing? Why do they miss the content of the question? The question is open-ended. All my questions are open-ended. None of them are closed. It's all open-ended. It depends on what the person wants to use and how they respond.
There could be data that is going to get it out.
No, they already know. They've already discussed. We've already discussed that this is something I want to write on the public record. That's why they came into the project. You know, I lay out the whole beginning that this is something I'm going to write about. Yeah. Right? Well, they're watching my eyes with great intensity, and they're listening to the nuances of my speech to tell them what shows up in your eyes first when you're talking with people.
If you are believing what they are saying.
No. Whether or not you're judgmental.
Oh.
That's what we're looking for, right? And so they'll give you a little tidbit, and they're watching to see how you receive it and what is the next question. But they're not really focused on the question, they're really focused on the sound of your voice and your eyes. Because if you're judgmental, it will show first in your eyes, and then when you ask the question, it will show in the tone of your voice. Right?
Are journalists able to suppress that kind of showing?
Many journalists are not. That's why they're very ineffective. I'm not a judgmental person to begin with, So, and I've interviewed a range of people, all types of people in my career. I had 33 years with Washington Post. So there's very little that you're going to tell me that shocked me or I'm going to have a negative reaction to and judge you negatively. Right? Because I've read a lot about, and I've written a lot about an entire range of human behavior, some of it very ugly. So most of it I'm going to receive in a neutral fashion. And my response is going to be a monotone. You won't pick up any inflection of judgment in my voice. You won't see it in my eyes. You just won't.
So you would say, well done, if there was nothing good that's done, and you would say, ah.
No.
No.
Like taking confession.
Maybe. It might be people thinking to practice psychotherapy without license, without training, psychology without license and training. But you're the first person to indicate I may be seen as a beast. So the person hasn't come to confess. Yes. He or she may not decide to begin really discussing their deepest motivations and their deepest experiences, and it will begin here, somewhere in here. And after we've established a level of trust. After I complete these 4 interviews, I will go on and do what are called focused interviews, and they focus on the contradictions. And once you begin to focus on the contradictions, more contradictions are introduced. So the interviewing after this, the focus interviews after this, could go on for months or years. The longest project I did was 4 years. I interviewed an underclass, the head of an underclass family, Rosalie Cunningham. Began the interviews in September of 1990, and completed the interviews in 1994 when the series ran in the Washington Post. But I didn't interview her. I interviewed Rosalie, all 8 of her adult children, 5 of her adolescent. She had about 30 grandchildren, 5 of the adolescent grandchildren, and 6 of her brothers and sisters. Her mother had 22 children, 11 of whom had lived to adulthood. And so Rosalie and 11 lived. So I interviewed Rosalie, and 6 of them, 4 of them turned me down. They didn't want to be interviewed because they knew their sister's lifestyle, and they didn't want to be included in what I was going to write.
Well, I'm from a country that gets a lot of children in the family, but I've never heard of 22 in the family.
Well, that's not uncommon among, this is a black sharecropping family in North Carolina, Northampton County. Among sharecroppers, that's not uncommon at all. Her first child, she gave birth to her first child when she was raped by a plantation overseer in the fields at age 13. She gave birth at 18. She was impregnated at 12. And after a year after she had raised the child, the overseer came and took the child from her. Rosalie's mother, Rosetta Wright. Rosetta Lawrence Wright. Wright was her married name.
Wow.
I only learned that because I went to the county, Jackson, the county seat for Northampton County. They worked on the Bishop and Powell plantation, where their families, their forebears had been emancipated on the plantation in 1865. And they worked generation after generation on the same plantation until the owner lost the plantation to the bank during the Great Depression in 1932. Then they moved to Maryland to work tobacco sharecropping outside of Leonardtown. But while they were there, they were not afforded any education. They were relatively isolated on the plantation, very little interaction with the outside world. Until the owner said, I can no longer feed you through the winter. And then they were forced to move. But Rosalie's grandmother had about the same number of children. I could never get an accurate count. Her mother had 22 children. Her grandmother, whose nickname was Chicken, but Eugenia Lawrence was her name. I've only seen photos of her. She had about 22 or 21 children. It was always debated because the expression that was used was, I own 22 children, meaning that I gave birth to 22 children. And mostly would say, I owned 9 children. I said, no, you only own 8. You adopted a child. She said, well, it's the same thing. I said, it's not the same thing. You can't use that expression for all 9. Right? But getting back to this project, adolescent childbearing, as I mentioned, the focus interviews go on for months and months and months. And when someone introduces a contradiction, and I'm going to give an example of one of my students. She was interviewing a woman who bans a woman who works at a rape crisis center, and she answers the phone and has been doing it for years. And the student wants to know, how can you do this one person, year after year, day after day? Because everyone who calls in has been injured and is traumatized and is in a lot of pain, emotional and physical. And we wear you down, really. And so she started, the woman was in her 60s, and she started interviewing her. And the woman painted an idyllic picture of going to school, and she grew up in Washington State, east of Seattle, the rural area east of Seattle. Family life, all of it was perfect. And each student comes to the seminar. We sit around a long table, and we talk about, I call each student for a 3-hour session, and they tell me about the interview they had the week before with their person. And by the time she reported this, I said, well, this is a perfect family. It's the first perfect family I've ever been aware of in America. And this will be a great story. But she knew I was teasing, and she knew what I was saying in terms of, this is too perfect, these two parts. Then when she got to the interview about faith, she grew up in a family of 6 children. She was somewhere in the middle. She told the student interviewer, my mother insisted that we get up early every Sunday morning. We all got dressed, and we all went to church. And each of the children were in Sunday school at their grade level, their equivalent grade level in elementary school. And she went on discussing this, and finally the student asked her, she said, well, what about your father? Did he go to church? And he said, no, my father was hungover every Sunday. And the student didn't really understand what that meant. And well, students, they're young, you're a little surprised. But I said to the student, that's not social drinking. Hungover every Sunday is what she said. That is not social drinking. There's a lot more there. That's your first contradiction. From the perfect family life. Yeah, right? Then she did growing up outside the family. And she got to the age, I think it was 11 or 12, and she started attending pajama parties at her girlfriend's home and moving around, and she told her about how much she enjoyed the pajama parties. So the student said, well, when did you reciprocate? When did you have one? She said, I never allowed my girlfriend to come to my house. I never knew what kind of condition my father was in. And they all knew that. That's not weekend drinking. That's daily drinking. Everything. She doesn't allow any of her girlfriends to visit her. And they know why. All right. So then, how does she now? She's got this information really that contradicts this information in the first 2 interviews. How does she now begin getting into this with this woman? The woman has introduced it, right? So you pick up the contradiction that she's giving to you, and how do you approach it now? And this is important. You can't go and say, the woman never used the term alcoholism or alcoholism. For whatever reason. That's what it is. You can't go say, well, your father was an alcoholic. Tell me about it. No, that's a non-starter. the best way to go around it, say, look, I was very interested in what you said about your father never attending church because he was hungover every Sunday, and you never having your girlfriends over or reciprocated in terms of having pajama parties, and they understood that. Why? Well, what was that all about? Tell me something about that. And then it all poured out. My life was a nightmare. None of this was true. None of what she had told was true. And the story just changed dramatically. And it really got down to her motivation for helping rape victims. And she felt driven. She felt that this was her cause. Right? All right. So that told the students a lot about why she really did this, why she was able to do this and be dedicated to this. All right. With the adolescents, I'm going to give you an example. This is a woman that I'm very much in touch with, even today. She was in the adolescent childbearing study. Sharita Grayer was her maiden name. She's now Sharita Grant. She married after the project was published, after she graduated from high school, but not the father of her first child. I was doing the school history with her, and her older sister, Carol, was there during the interview in the family living room. I'm interviewing Sharita at the family dining table. And we're just going through the school history. But before the school history, I did a preliminary interview when I first met her, and she told me that she got pregnant because her boyfriend, William Wheeler, insisted on sex without protection. She got pregnant, and he abandoned her. Now, I already knew from this preliminary interview that William Wheeler was in prison, medium security prison outside Washington, a place called Washington, Virginia, that was run by the D.C. Department of Corrections. But I eventually went and interviewed him there over several days. But I hadn't met William yet. So she said when she was 14, her mother had died of breast cancer without telling her anything about human sexuality. So she was very vulnerable to William's manipulation. And as a result, she got pregnant, and I met her son. Her son was between the ages of 2 and 3 at the time, Monteith. So that was her story. That was the high school counselor story. It wasn't the true story. She was giving me the okie. All of these teenagers just like, this old man, we could tell them anything. And I never said to them, oh, I don't believe that. I just took it all in their mind. We're doing the school history. Now, what I had not realized, I grew up in New York City. What I had not realized is that sex education has changed so much in the school system, at least in the D.C. system. Because when I went to school in New York City, we had to take a course called public hygiene. And in the 9th grade, I went to a co-ed junior high school, Owensville Junior High School. In 9th grade, our male public hygiene teacher had one discussion. In the whole year, we took this one discussion about human sexuality. He was embarrassed and red-faced through the whole discussion. The girls titted and embarrassed him even more. The boys laughed like they knew everything about it. They were lying. But they were pretending that they knew, like most males. And I don't remember anything he said. Except his awkwardness, his being embarrassed, the giggling and the laughing, and that was it. I don't have any information from that discussion. And I was trying to pay attention. So that was my experience. Now, I'm assuming incorrectly that this is probably the experience of kids going to public school in Washington, D.C. I was totally wrong. Because when we went through her school history, and she had a fantastic memory for teachers' names, her buddies, friendships that she began to form in elementary school. And so it was a rich interview in terms of her school history. When we get to the 7th grade, she talks about the sex education course in the 7th grade at age 11. And I'm thinking, this is probably some half-hour discussion. The students walk away with nothing. No, she goes into detail of the process of human reproduction from that class, the class that she never cut. And her teachers went through every form of birth control. She's 11, in the 7th grade. She doesn't get pregnant until she's 14. She doesn't realize that she just pulled off her mask right in front of me. Her sister realized, because the sister knew what she had told her. And I said, with a straight face, no intonation. So when you got pregnant 3 years later, you knew what you were doing. Oh, wow. That's just how she reacted. Then she covered her face and looked at the wall for 30 seconds. This is a tape recording. It's 30 seconds. I just let the tape go. On the tape, what you hear in those 30 seconds is her older sister rolling around the living room floor laughing. Right? Because, you know, she just sort of dramatically contradicted what she first told her. She composed herself, looked at me, and she said, no. When I got pregnant, I forgot everything.
Oh, wow.
Convenient.
And I didn't bat an eye. I said, okay, let's move on to the 8th grade. Right. 4 months later, remember, I'm interviewing everyone in the family about their lives and their own coming to sexuality. Carol, we're out to dinner. Most of these conversations took place in the apartment I rented or at a restaurant because we had 3 or 4 generations living in the household. Bird type station in the household, radio going, television going, all the time. So you had to take the person that you were interviewing out of the house. That's the only way you could do an interview. I'm interviewing Carol at a restaurant. This is the older sister who told him before laughing. She said, look, I'm going to tell you the truth about why she really got pregnant. But you must swear. And I want to see you swear. I said, cross my heart and hope you die. To this day, I have never told Sharita. Well, Sharita and I are still very close. Never told Sharita that, of course, she was willing to tell me the truth. Carol told me. It wasn't necessary because Carol told me in great detail what Sharita had confided in her about her desire to become pregnant. And it revolves around issues of colorism in the black community. Sharita is a dark-skinned girl, very attractive, but very low self-esteem because she is dark-skinned, and William Wheeler was light-skinned.
Oh, wow.
They were breaking up. She didn't figure she could get another light-skinned boyfriend. She intentionally got pregnant to try to hold on to him. It's classic her. He erupted in fury because he knew what was going on. They were having problems. Suddenly she turned her pregnant. They had been sexually active to the point where she got pregnant for 3 years. She initiated sexual activity with William Miller when she was 11 and he was 12. To get him as a boyfriend. Right? She wasn't willing to tell me that until the 7th focused interview, the 3rd hour of the 7th focused interview. She laid it all out, had no idea I had chapter and verse from Carol. She still doesn't know today. What I found was, when I started this project, I asked colleagues and relatives why they thought so many adolescent girls, black girls, growing up in poverty were having children. And it was a range of reactions. Most people were extrapolating from their own personal experience. What you learn as a journalist very quickly is people will never tell you, I don't know. Right? So everybody had a rationale for the behavior that was statistically there. My cousin told me that she was a principal, at the time she was a principal of an elementary school that serviced a very poor black area of Fairfax County in Northern Virginia called Gum Springs. These blacks who had been emancipated on the Gum Springs plantation and are still there. Yeah, mid-1908, at the end of the Civil War, they're still there. Generations. Still living in poverty and still intergenerational poverty, trapped in intergenerational poverty. And her take was that Blanche said to me, these girls are having babies qualified for welfare payments. And I said, not true. I said, I've written enough about welfare families. All welfare families. No food in the house by the third or fourth week of every month. It's not some large, fabulous salary. It's a factor. It's not an incentive for you to have children to get on welfare rolls. But if you've grown up in circumstances like that, where is the incentive? A colleague at the Washington Post said,
Is it still true?
yes.
By the third week, then it's over?
Oh, yeah, third week, except for infants, through the WIC program. There's always formula, and the formula will be extended. Make sure that the infant doesn't go without food, but for the children and the adults in the household, do the best you can for the person next month. Yes. That applies to the food stamp program. It used to be, well, in this area, I don't know, I don't remember, no, this area was food stamps from the Great Society.
Do you think it's because of abuse of what they ate, or because it's not enough?
It's never been enough. It has never been enough since the program was established. And intentionally so, because conservatives feel you provide too much incentive for the poor. If you cover their entire needs for a month, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And if you're following Congress at the moment, you know the attitude. Right. So, but it's clear, it's never been enough.
No.
So, then a colleague I asked at the Washington Post, he said these girls are growing up in very bleak circumstances and were emotionally needy and easily manipulated by the adolescent boys that they hung out with, the boys full of macho. And I said, well, no. I said, I don't think that's what's going on. This is what I thought it was. And he said, well, why not? I said, well, it sounds kind of sexist to me. One. Two, I grew up in Harlem, surrounded by Harlem. Where were these easy to manipulate teenage girls when I was a teenage boy? I didn't encounter them. Right? The girls I knew were very tough. And you weren't convincing them of doing anything that they didn't want to do. You were not manipulating them. I didn't find them to be emotionally needy. So now I'm well into the project when Sharita reveals to me what Carol has already told me, and all of the kids begin to open up about the same time. All of them without realizing their mothers had told me their motivations. Friends of theirs had told me the motivations. But I'm interacting with a wide circle of people now in this community. Right? And without going through the individual stories, none of the pregnancies were out of ignorance. None of them were accidental. All of them were intentional. And one of the generalities I came away with was that these children were seeking to become parents. One, the group that I was focused on were doing poorly in school. And there was a smaller group at the Loup High School that they dismissively referred to as brainiacs. And they were all in advanced placement. They were as sexually active as the kids who were doing poorly, but any pregnancies among the brainiacs were terminated by abortion. Why? What is it? The kids that I studied, the girls got pregnant and intended to go full term. I put the line one Sharita hid her being mother was dead, I told you mother was dead. Sharita hid her pregnancy from her older brother, who was her legal guardian, Stephen. When he found out about it, he slapped her across the room. Took her to a physician for an abortion. The physician and Sharita in the back room, from the medical area, the physician picked up Sharita's hand and said, "You really don't want this abortion." She said, "No." And so they conspired, they colluded to present Stephen, who was waiting out front, and paying for the abortion. They colluded, and he came out and said, "She's too far, man. We can't. She has to go full term. She can't have an abortion." But that was not true. Stephen and I laughed about that today. I said, "Things are slow." You let your sister, little sister do that to you? But Marquise now is an adult. Yeah. But in general, the adolescents saw, particularly adolescents who were doing poorly in school, let me go back to that. The kids who were the brainiacs in advanced placement saw themselves as having a post-secondary future. The kids who were doing poorly knew that they were not graduating. And so for them, having a child was an achievement. It's not something you send back after 30 days. It's with you. Also, having a child for the girls and the boys was, for them, a significant rite of passage from adolescence to adulthood. And they all used the expression, "I'm grown now." Now, I hung out with them. They were not grown. But that is how they saw themselves. And they got a lot of support from relatives and friends in the community now that they were parents, both the girls and the boys. Something I didn't, all of this to me was revelatory. Didn't understand it until I got into it. Yeah.
What is the meaning that, the fathers, they use them, that girls are supposed to, they are the ones taking on the kids?
All of the fathers were very interactive with their children at the beginning. None of the fathers, except those who were dealing drugs, had the money to support the child. Remember, I'm talking about all of these kids who are doing poorly in school. They're not really marketable for the American job market. And unless he was doing something illegal, the adolescent father could not supplement the welfare support for the child. What happened? And I watched it play out. Because remember, Sheila was 6 months pregnant. So her son was born, Pete was born in January. And I had already met the father, Mario. And what happened soon after he was born? Mario worked, he was a high school graduate, one of the few in this community, and he worked as a night watchman. Right? If his car fell apart, he didn't have enough money to fix it. He drove a hoopty. You know what a hoopty is? It's a car held together by wire and bubble gum. You know, if you buy it from a second-hand car, right? Sheila's mother, Audrey, who I introduced to you earlier, this is the woman that erupted at Sheila when Sheila told me her pregnancy was a sign from God that he loved her. Sheila's mother was putting pressure on Sheila to have Mario give economic supplements to Sheila to support Pete. Mario didn't have enough money to pay rent. You know, one-bedroom apartment in Washington Island. He lived with his grandparents, and he gave them rent to stay there. He didn't have enough, you know, he gave them, you know, it was a token amount. All right. Well, he was able to give a little bit of money to Sheila, but not enough. So what happened between Sheila and Mario? Tell me. Sheila denied Mario access to meetings in retaliation.
Economic support.
Got it. Money is a big issue here. Most of the fathers of these children ended up in prison. And from prison, trying to call to speak to their children while they're growing up or when they're young, or speaking to the mother of their children, that is a collect call. You don't call from prison on your own dime. You call collect, and the person has to accept it as a collect call. It's a long distance call from Virginia to Washington. And so the mothers would deny the call. What is beginning to happen? Right? The distance is beginning to grow. There was a big fight between Sheila and Mary. I won't take you into details. It was very, very early. Sheila's mother, she was there. She told us all that. It was very, very early. And it was all over money. All right? So Mary stops coming by to try to keep eating. But she wouldn't let him into the apartment to keep eating. He didn't have any money to go to a lawyer and take her to court for joint custody. But what you just gave me was stereotyping. That the fathers abandoned There was one father who was a very successful drug dealer. And it's always momentary. 3 or 4 months. You know, that counts as success. Bought his 3-year-old daughter fur coat. Waste of money, stupid investment, but this is an expression of his pride. He had money to buy it. He bought her a fur coat. And he showered the mother of his daughter with a lot of money. There were no issues of money between them. So he always had access to his daughter until he was shot in the back by stick-up boys. He lived, but they severed his spine. He ended up paraplegic and in prison, in a wheelchair, one after the other. None of the fathers that I met of the children a year later were on the street. None of them, except Mario. He was still working at the night watch. A year after the project began, none of them were on the street. They were all in prison. Remember, I'm talking about the entire group doing poorly in school. One boy could not read, was something else that was very, for me, revelatory. One boy could not read well enough to take a driver's test, the written part of the driver's test, to become a truck driver. What are his options? So I didn't find that any of the fathers abandoned the children. They were not able to support their children. And when they were able to support the children, they had open access to the children. But that was always short-lived. Yeah. Any other questions?
So how did you come up with this, your 4 areas in which to
begin the process?
Yes, to begin the process.
I just thought it through, and I wanted to start. Remember, I was talking about human sexuality being a very sensitive topic. I said, well, Leon, why don't you start in some ways relatively neutral, school? And because I want to see the impact of an institution on their lives and in their thoughts, and how they were unsuccessful or successful in maneuvering the institution of school. Right? So that was why I began there. Then I wanted to open up into the family. In 3 of the families, I found a deep fear passed from grandmother to daughter to granddaughter, a deep fear of birth control, any form of birth control. And I went from the adolescent mother to her mother, and then tracked down, and then I had to travel. I had to go to North Carolina and then to find the grandmother because she was still living. And it's who she was. And I'd get around to this deep fear. I could never find the source of the fear. None of them could articulate the source of the fear, but all of them had acknowledged that they passed this fear to their daughter, and this continued. And that to me was another, revelatory. I didn't have any idea it existed. Yes. Yes.
About the human behavior, people establishing, can you find them online?
Yes. You can find the book Rosalie. You can get the book Rosalie. It's very expensive in paperback. I'm sorry. on adolescent childbearing. The title of the book is When Children Want Children. Yeah. Children Want Children. And then the other book is Rosalie, A Mother and a Family.
How about do you do psychoanalysis or?
No, I'm a journalist.
Yeah,
I'm not prepared to do any psychoanalysis. I don't have any training in psychoanalysis. No. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not an ethnographer. I'm just a reporter.
You have used about human behavior.
What did you say?
Human behavior.
What about human behavior?
Did you wrote anything about it?
These are the two things that are available in the book that are written about human behavior. I've written many series that were published in the Washington Post, but these are the only two books that I did.
Well, following up on that question, did you submit your findings to psychoanalysis?
No.
So that they make their analysis on it?
Well, one of the things that I do, I never do when I'm doing a project, is interview experts.
Right.
Never.
Okay.
And I do that, that's an intentional decision. I will interview experts after I've done the research. Because in every instance I have found, when I'm beginning a project and I go to interview people who are experts in this area, they put you in a box.
All right.
And it's the box of their stream and their discipline. And then depends on what expert you interview. Let's say in sociology, some will be quantitative, some will be qualitative, and they have their own prejudices. I always interview them after I've done the research. So I went to interview after the adolescent childbearing study was done, the research was done, it hadn't been finished yet. I went to interview two experts. One of whom had written a book about black teenagers growing up in Pruitt-Igoe in St. Louis, which was dynamited at some point in Missouri because it was so decrepit, public housing. I read her book 3 times during the project, and I was stunned because I couldn't find anything that she had written that corresponded to what I was finding. When I went to interview her, she spent most of the interview interviewing me. So I was very disappointed. The other was a psychologist at Howard University. And she was very helpful to me when I told her my findings and helping me interpret them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I quoted her. Yes.
Right.
But from the first expert, who was a sociologist,
right,
black sociologist, what I got from her was that she could write about her subjects anonymously. None of the people that I write about were anonymous. I had photographs, their names, their real names, and everything in the article, in the series. The series ran for a week. What I got from the black sociologist was she had adjusted the information she reported so it wouldn't reflect badly on the black community. And I just felt that was dishonest. But she felt that was her obligation. Yes.
So, can you talk about the kinds of students that you train throughout the years, particularly at the University of Illinois Northwestern, the different disciplines that have been able to use this method to flesh out research or to study people?
Well, here's one. Professor Hobson. He was one of my students in the same course. And he was a PhD candidate in history. I've had a number of PhD candidates in history, psychology, sociology, ethnography, anthropology, education. Landscaping. Douglas Williams, landscaping. And I said to Douglas, why do you want to learn? He said, I'm going to interview people in Chicago with neighborhood gardens. And I was going to try to find out how these neighborhood gardens impact their lives. And then I said, it made all the sense in the world. But again, explain it first, because I didn't understand why he was in my class. a lot of undergraduate journalists and graduate journalists. And the course is very popular. In fact, I had to limit them to 5 among law students. But I had to limit them to 5 each semester, or they would dominate the class. And it's very difficult to get them to stop talking. I have to get around to each student. So I put them at a ceiling of 5. And that was after 15 registered for the class. And then there were 16 others, so there were 31 students. So it was very difficult to get around the table in 3 hours. I kept having to cut the law students off. So after that experience, I said to the law college, we've got a ceiling of 5 students. So I teach the class every fall. So I had 5 law students in the class every fall. No psychotherapist. No psychologist. Usually what happens is if other professors in other disciplines are aware that their PhD candidates will be interviewing for their dissertation, and they know about this methodology, they know that I teach it, they send the student to the class. That's how it happens. And I always take special care with the PhD students. I didn't have to do this more recent, because they've had a lot of academic training, and they're taking a lot of coursework before they're getting ready to go into the dissertation, right? And they think that an interview is you write down a question, you write down a list of questions, you look at the person, you ask the question, the person gives you one-word answer, and you move on to the next question. All right? And they come with, I said, no, put away the list. You don't need a list. You went to school. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Start the interview on school. Use your own experience. Ask the person, did they start school in preschool? Preschool often connotes 2 working parents. Right? That's why the child was in preschool until he was 3 years old. Ask questions and ask questions about school. Use your own experience. The person will tell you, no, I didn't have experience like this. This was my experience. You don't need a list of questions, and don't take your eyes away from the person to look at it. I don't want you to take any notes. Get a quality recorder, digital recorder now, so you and record the interview. You grew up in a family. Ask questions. Start the interview at the earliest childhood memory. If the person doesn't give you enough, do a follow-up question, then ask questions in relationship to your growing up. And they will tell you, no, that was not my experience. We lived like this, and we did this, and we did that. Most of you went to church. Why do you need a list of questions? You don't need a list of questions. You're not to take your eyes off the person. And the person should be locked into that person's eyes through the whole class. Make sure if you don't have an electrical outlet, you take an extra set of batteries with you. Right. I said all that because of the experiences that they.
So what do you think about the future, what's the future for the Muslim students that are asking
who are in poverty?
Yeah.
I see the situation getting worse.
Especially in Chicago.
I see it getting worse all over the country. I see things improving for the black middle class, but not for the people who are growing up poor. I see things improving also for the black working class, but not for the people who are stuck in chronic unemployment. Number one, I don't see the only this trying to find solutions to this situation gave me a big headache several times during this project. The only thing I see is quality education. And I can tell you that in public schools that serve the poor, it's not happening. Or in any place in the country. And public education is the only education they have access to.
See, most like immigrants like us,
What did you say?
most immigrants from other countries, they come
Like
here.
Ethiopia?
Ethiopia, from anybody, or
Right.
Indians, Asians,
Right.
they start very poor. They start, you come as a refugee, but they put their children the children now becoming doctors of the hospital or school, that they are not in that type of trust, you know? Those
Yeah, I
people are
understand.
getting the doctor.
Well, I don't know, if you look at it, it's when you cited Indians, I have a lot of Indian students. You cited Indians. Now, the education for the rural poor of India is not the education you can describe. And I see that the Indians with a middle class status put their children in quality schools. The children in the rural poor, in the rural part of India, which is 80% of the population of India, don't have access to those schools. They don't have the money, their parents don't have the money. So I think you're operating on understanding that doesn't exist. When I meet African immigrants, I spend a lot of time living and working in Africa. When I meet African immigrants, I do a short, they don't know they're being interviewed. I do a short few questions to figure out what is their social class level, or the social class level of their parents if they're very young. And I don't find any rural Africans immigrating into the U.S. All right? So I find urban elite, which is 40% of the African whole continent population. I don't find, like, I was a people volunteer in a very small trade center in northwest Kenya. None of those kids, that was in 69 and 70, none of those kids had made it to the U.S. for education. And I've encountered a large number of Kenyans who are educated. They all come out of Nairobi. They come out of three cities, Nairobi, Mombasa, and Eldoret. They all come from the middle class. So I don't think your statistics are correct.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's Margaret Speaker. She's here online, and she wanted to let you know. Scroll back up.
I know that name from some people.
Yeah, she's the coordinator of the PSO.
The Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation.
Oh, okay.
And she's also a professor of biology
Where?
here at Lewis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Margaret. What's the name? Margaret Major. I know that name. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, she says she's very impressed by your journalistic research and was wondering if you accomplished what you hoped for from this project.
Yes, I wanted to understand why adolescents were having children. That's why I started the project. After paying a horrendous dinner bill. Right, yes, but that's what I really was looking for, because I was getting a lot of misinformation that the kids. One of the biggest elements of the misinformation is that these children were ignorant about their reproductive capability and were ignorant of birth control. The first teenager I interviewed, Tasha Vaughn, in her living room, Labor Day weekend, 1984, said to me, like I was a naive child, "Mr. Dad, will you stop asking me about birth control? All the kids out here know well everything we need to know about birth control by the age of 11 and 12. The girls out here get pregnant because they want to have babies. You need to find out what's going on." And so that was my first interview. I came to her through the Paramount Baptist Church, and then she began introducing me to people. One of the stories she told me was that her younger brother, she knew that his girlfriend, she was 16 now, this is her younger brother. She knew that his girlfriend wanted a child, and she kept asking her brother not to do it. So much so that they broke up, because he would not cooperate and impregnate his girlfriend.
He would have wound up in prison. I mean.
No. He was a young boy and she was a young girl. They were both 14 years old. He wouldn't have ended up in prison.
No, I mean, that's.
Well, that's not connected. The adolescent childbearing and going to prison is not connected. The lack of education in going to prison is connected. Yes, one last question.
So, was it just a reporting, or or that was a conclusion?
The conclusion was that none of these kids were getting pregnant out of ignorance or lack of knowledge of reproductive capability or ignorance of how birth control.
So there's simply an aggregate from what you got from everybody, it's not.
Well, no, it was laid out in 7 separate articles. Why?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's thank Professor Nash. So, thank you all very much, especially those who are online and in the audience, for attending our first popular STEAM talk. I think it was an excellent first attempt at an intersection between how all the disciplines work together to really kind of draw upon conclusions, which is what I think we all do in our individual disciplines. So again, thank you very much. If you want to know more about the work that Professor Dash has done, he has 2 books, I think. Is that correct, Professor?
3 books.
3 books, okay.
Shame of the Prisons.
Okay,
I'm thinking in chronological order.
Okay.
Shame of the Prisons. The Shame of the Prisons. When Children Want Children, and Rosalie. R-O-S-A, 2 words, R-O-S-A-L-E-E.
And both Blue Stories, the one that you want us to look provide for.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So again, thank you very much. Would you like to have you?
Thank you for having me. Okay, I'm sorry if I keep walking out of range.
Oh, no, that's okay, the camera has a pretty good
I can't
angle.
stand still.
So-
Okay.
I-